Hi, good evening, everyone. So my name is Mary Lachieski, and today we will be reviewing the Cleveland Opportunity Corridor project. So just a little bit of an overview and table setting. So today we'll be reviewing a draft environmental impact statement, or DEIS, which was published in August 2013. I wasn't able to find the VICE, so we're going to be doing the DEIS, which is sufficient. And then the report is 121 pages. It's a little bit different than other environmental impact statements. It was written with the intention of being accessible for a reader with irregular ability. So the text is simple. There's helpful graphics and charts. So I hope you like flipping through it. And the goal is to really be able to reach those who live in the area. The purpose of this study was to review the proposed construction of a new arterial roadway within the city of Cleveland to improve connectivity, access, and mobility. The project was $331.3 million in total. And because that amount was so high, it was actually phased out. And so ODOT and the city of Cleveland had funding through the Transportation Review Advisory Council, or TRAC, for phase one. And at this point in time, they were seeking funding for phase two. The study examined 6 alternatives as well as a no action alternative, so 7 in total, that were 5 of which, including the no action alternative, were actually dismissed for a variety of reasons. And so this study examines the preferred alternative. And just a quick note, this Opportunity Corridor was a project that was recently initiated within Cleveland. So it took 5 years to build and was open in 2021. So looking at the study area, it stretches from the intersection of 77 and 490, as well as East 55th in the west. And then it goes all the way to East 105th Street and Chester Avenue in the east, which is right around where the Cleveland Clinic is. This is really an area of economic prosperity within Cleveland. There's a lot of jobs and activity going on. And just to show you the map too, so this red area is kind of the study area. And as you can note, so here's the Cleveland Clinic main campus. If you're trying to get from the west side of Cleveland to this space, you have to go all the way up and around. So it's really inconvenient, or down and up. So the study would take about 46.9 acres of land, which would be a permanent right-of-way, would be needed to build the project. And then about 39 acres of additional land, a temporary easement, would be needed for a short-term basis while the project is being built. We're looking at an urbanized area without any major natural resources such as wetlands, streams, or bodies of water, and no agricultural productions. So the joint lead agencies are the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration, Ohio Division, and the Ohio Department of Transportation. So this really is a transportation-led study. There's 7 participating agencies, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Department of Interior, U.S. EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Federal Railroad Administration and Federal Transit Authority. At this point in time, we're looking in 2013, so we're squarely under the regulation of NEPA, as well as it's an environmental justice community. So the Presidential Executive Order 12898, which is the federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. Additionally, there are going to be some relocations. So the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act. And then just looking at the timeline, so this has been identified as a problem in Cleveland for 50 years before this study was even published. So early in the 1960s, people were coming up with proposals for an arterial connection. But the actual study of it didn't begin until the early 2000s. So this is that early planning. So in the early 2000s, ODOT began a study of the Cleveland's Interbelt Freeway. And then in fall 2004 through 2006, the Cleveland Opportunity Corridor study formally began. And then afterwards, in spring 2009 through the early 2013, the alternatives were developed, there were environmental studies, and then the notice of intent went out on September 1st, 2010. And then here we are in August 2013 with the DEIS. And of course, since it's NEPA, we're moving forward. We'll need the final EIS as well as the record of decision. So thinking about, okay, who put this together and who performed this assessment? Obviously, the lead agencies, as I mentioned before, were spearheading the study. Within the study, there's a list of 14 individuals who prepared it, and they're through a firm called HNTB, who did the EJ technical memorandum. And it's a transportation firm to create infrastructure to meet transportation needs. Most of the individuals have degrees in civil engineering. There's a physics, math, architecture, environmental design, environmental science, but it's mostly a STEM background team. And so I think, as we get into SIA, we'll see that engineering focus. It's important to note too, within this study, as I mentioned, there will be environmental justice concerns. So it's going through an area of Cleveland called the Forgotten Triangle, supported by Woodland, Woodhill, and Kinsman. So this is an area that has seen population decline since the 1940s. And it's really primarily been led by the loss of manufacturing and other jobs that have just caused people to leave over time. This area will actually span 6 different neighborhoods: Central, Fairfax, University, Buckeye, Kinsman, and Slavic Village. And so part of the goal is not only to increase the system linkage and improve mobility, but also support the planned economic development. So this over here, University Circle is a major economic hub. The hope is that you will create the infrastructure to support the planned revival and redevelopment in the area in and around the Forgotten Triangle. So just a quick overview of the impact synopsis. So out of the 7 alternatives, only 1 was the preferred alternative. And with that, there would be, I think, significant residential relocations. So 64 buildings and 76 units would have to be relocated. There'd also be commercial building relocation, so 25 buildings and 16 occupants. 1 church needs to also be relocated. It's, not like a giant church, but it's a small building church, community church. And then the impact assessment also really highlighted what they see as the benefits to the people in the Forgotten Triangle. So including improved bicycle and pedestrian connections, as well as access and safety. Several streets would need to be cul-de-saced or closed. But in each of these areas, the project would provide access to homes and businesses, and including access to bicycles, pedestrians, and emergency services. They consider these impacts to be minor. Also, public transportation is going to be improved. Community and public services would also be improved through increased access to emergency service providers. Air quality, once a project is complete, it's not supposed to be a project of air quality concern. There's also a visual resource improvement. So several design features were coordinated with the community during the design process to improve the look of the study area. We'll dig a little bit into the environmental justice concerns in a minute, but those are probably the most significant. And then there's a variety of construction impacts, as you can imagine. So temporary construction effects can include temporary use of land to build the new boulevard and other features, temporary increase in noise from construction activities, temporary decrease in local air quality due to increased emissions from equipment and dust, travel delays and detours, as well as potentially interruption of existing utility services. Lastly, there's the indirect and cumulative effects. So the future land use could also have more impacts to residents and businesses. This study claims that they could choose to move out to the area if they wanted, and there'd be available land nearby. They also claim that the project could result in indirect effects to historic resources, though these aren't categorized. And then lastly, once again, the project could provide increased economic activity and job opportunities. So once again, those aren't categorized. Just lastly, I think there's unavoidable impacts to the low income and more minority populations would occur. And then several measures be put into place to mitigate those impacts. Looking at the methods and variables, of course, as you would imagine, there was an evaluation of census records. So they built a community profile using, the area, the median family income, the percent urban. There was a census of housing, so looking at how many houses were owner-occupied versus rentals. There's a land use pattern map. There was a variety of maps, dozens throughout the whole study. They also had an advisory group that they formed. They held a lot of community forums, and then there was a relocation assistance program survey. So the goal was to show feasible residential and business relocation sites within and near the study area. So the goal was they looked at the local market and within a 5-mile radius of the study area. And they basically said that anyone who was going to be affected could move within the same region. And then what variables they look at? So they looked at, of course, once again, relocation of individuals and families, disruption of daily living and movement patterns, changes in community infrastructure, like bike paths, roadways, connections, and then land acquisition and disposal. So what land are they going to be taking, and how are they going to be changing that? What I would say is, an obvious missing variable is the introduction of a new social class. So the goal of the project is economic revitalization, which essentially means the Opportunity Corridor can introduce a new social class and invite gentrification to the area. The underlying assumption in the document is that this would be a net positive for the community, but there's no analysis to back up of what gentrification would mean for these individuals or the community attitudes towards the changes in the area. Neighborhood businesses, political and transportation agency representatives, and leaders of community development corporations. So they really did a great job of assembling a diverse set of key stakeholders in the area. And they had extensive coordination efforts over an iterative process. So it included 12 public meetings, more than 15 business coordination meetings, 5 neighborhood meetings, and 12 steering committee meetings. So they presented to the public through an iterative process. There is a series of large open house and public meetings, and starting in September 2009 through October 2010. And then once that preferred alternative was chosen, it was then presented to the public in July 2011. The one thing that I'll note about this public involvement and where it's lacking is it doesn't show how many distinct individuals attended these meetings. So it could be a representative of a vocal minority that actually ended up shaping the alternative. And so the public and other stakeholders led the design changes to reduce impacts and improve the look of the roadway and best meet the community's needs. So the path of the roadway was shifted in a variety of places to minimize the number of homes and businesses affected. Sign features were added to the project, lighting, lawns, street trees, retaining walls, as well as just basic things like benches, trash receptacles, and bike racks. And from this study, you're meant to infer that these are amenities that the community was not being provided through their tax dollars previously, though there's no study to prove it. And of course, since we are under NEPA, there is a comment period that will be occurring once the DIS is published. And so the comment period, of course, is at least 45 days. And then there will be a public hearing. And lastly, since there were unavoidable impacts to low income and minority populations, there are several mitigation strategies that were put into place, including suggestions from the community. So ODOT agreed to build 2 pedestrian and bike bridges. There's also a voluntary residential relocation program. So for those residents whose homes aren't actually directly impacted by the project, they're actually eligible for relocation assistance. And then there's all reasonable efforts to relocate residents within the same neighborhood if that's where they want to go. For required relocations, they have to provide replacement housing that has similar access to public transportation, because the assumption is that people might not have single occupancy vehicles. There was also $500,000 that was dedicated to the expansion of the recreation center. And then at this point in time, since this is the DIS, there's the opportunity for more comments and more additional measures to be incorporated into the project. So we're coming to the end of the presentation, and I guess the question is at this point, what are the additional recommendations or what's missing? And so a very obvious one for me from studying in this class is that the comparative diachronic model CDM analysis was absent from this study. So there's no control community, there's no comparative community. And additionally, within this plan, there weren't any formal plans. So while there was baselining, there weren't any formal plans to monitor what happened after the project occurs. So that was certainly missing. And then surveys and questionnaires to measure community attitudes towards the project, as well as psychosocial impacts. A lot of the residents are elderly, and so I just can't imagine what they must be going through to actually have their houses removed, and what that does to their sense of community. Although the community was engaged through stakeholder meetings, surveys and questionnaires would have been helpful in securing the opinions of all affected populations, not just those who are inclined to join community meetings. And lastly, there was no monitoring of indirect and cumulative effects like population change, business development, labor occupational analysis. So in the SIA, it was assumed that although some residents would be negatively affected, the unspoken assumption is that the opportunity corridor is going to bring economic opportunity and revitalization to the neighborhood. So I'm interested. It would be helpful to know the population chain and economic analysis to be included in that monitoring information. And just an overview of the 6 principles that we're also familiar with at this point. I gave them a grading scale. In general, the first 4 I think were met sufficiently. And then when we looked at the environmental justice issues were being fully described and analyzed, I think not having that monitoring afterwards or that comparative analysis, it seemed insufficient to me. And then principle 6, the monitoring and evaluation afterwards to measure those mitigation measures. So here's my references. Thanks for sticking with me. Hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Cleveland and river transportation.